Hello, welcome to the April edition of the Studio Chat. This month I'm joined remotely by Josh, the lead designer and developer of the Homeland expansion. We're going to be talking about Root and about all the other stuff that's going on at the studio. I'm glad to have you all with us. Well, Josh, you got to crawl out of the hole with me like just a little bit a few weeks ago because we were both in San Francisco for GDC. I think GDC is a kind of funny show to go to as a tabletop person because, it's a big conference. It's mostly directed towards video games, but they do have this very small tabletop summit, and you and I got to go out there and give a talk.
I remember I got into the hotel room at like 1 in the morning. You were already asleep, and so I opened up the door and woke you up a little bit. But I was worried that I wasn't even going to make the talk at all. But I'm glad that I happened to make it because yeah, our talk was the very first slot on the very first day, so we were kind of like waking up and just getting right to it.
I think the
I think the
next
next
time I
time
try to
I
do a
try to do a
GDC talk,
GDC
I'm going
talk,
to
I'm going to
request
request
not to be
not
the
to be
first
the
talk
first
of the
talk of
day
the
because I
day
think
because I
I've
think I've
always been
always
the
been the
first
first
talk every
talk
time
every
I've
time
done
I've
it.
done it.
I mean, there are advantages. Like, it does mean that you get done with the thing that you need to do immediately. But yeah, having it in the very first slot of the very first day does, it leaves little room for error in terms of getting there. So,
Well, and
Well,
it's,
and
I mean,
it's, I mean,
I
I
like, it's funny. I always tell people that the moment that I get accepted to do a talk at GDC is like the happiest I'll ever be about GDC until I get there because I always
uh-huh.
stress out about it. It's like it's an exciting show, but it's a show that it just demands a lot because you're in a room filled with your peers and your betters. And so you really
Right.
want to do right. And what's going to happen is someone in 3 years is going to watch that talk and then come up to you and have things they want to tell you about it. And
Hmm.
so you have to make sure that you're willing to do something that you're okay defending for the next few years.
Yeah, and
And
this
that can
was
be
the first
exhausting.
time for both of us that we did a two-person talk as well. So this was a bit of a new experience for that as well. And it was fun. It was it's more work definitely, but it was a lot of fun. We've worked together for a long time, and so it was fun just like kind of so for people in the audience who haven't seen it, which is pretty much everybody at this point. We
Sure.
basically did a talk that kind of mixed. It was kind of a studio history, but it was specifically from the perspective of how we do open development. So how we develop games in public over long periods of time. So like early access, but for tabletop, which is
Right.
less common in our work.
And it shares a lot of characteristics with early access in video games. The elevated heart rates, the long hours. I mean, all that stuff is the same. So it seemed like a very good place to do a talk like that. But at the same time, I'm so happy we did it because, especially in the conversations outside of the talk and just as we were mingling and chatting with people, tabletop is pretty strange. The very
Yeah.
first time I went to GDC, someone told me that they loved going to the tabletop summit talks because tabletop just reminded them of what PC games were like in the early 90s, where you have small teams working for about a year on a game that is kind of make or break, and then the full team moves on to the next game. And that is just so different
Yep.
from how the vast majority of the video game space works.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, so I had a lot of fun. First time in San Francisco for me. Uh, yeah, we stayed along the water, which was nice. I see why the Fisherman's Wharf in San Francisco is where all the tourists go because it's just like a nice place to hang
Yeah,
out. I had
it's
the
totally
best
beautiful.
I had the best mussels of my entire life. Not earth mussels, but the sea mussels. Best mussels of my life. So
No, it was really pleasant. Also, we were it was a comic location to get to the convention center because the best mode of transport to go from where we were staying to the convention center was the cable car. Like so,
yeah,
as opposed
it
to being
really
like a
was.
touristy, like out of door, out of the way thing to do. I'm like, gosh, I really need to get to the other side of the hill in about 20 minutes. I guess the cable car is going to get me there faster than an Uber.
Yeah,
But
I,
it,
I,
it was
I had
lovely.
sort of, I had sort of this vision quest going in that we would be able to, bike nicely along the water. And for a number of reasons, that sort of ended up falling apart, but thankfully not catastrophically. But we
Mhm.
adjusted and we got along fine. So yeah, really, really good time in San Fran.
It was a nice time for both of us because I feel like we have, I mean, I am deep in Oath and you were deep in Root, and we
Yeah,
have been so preoccupied with our major projects that we hadn't had a chance to just catch up and also
yep,
talk about the projects with each other in a really earnest way. And so in the
yeah,
evenings, instead of going to all the after parties and things, we often just went back to the hotel room and worked and talked about the games we were working on. And so it was almost like a really nice like work retreat. And so yeah,
yeah,
I really enjoyed it. We have to make sure to schedule more like week long work retreats in the middle of production.
yes, agreed.
So I have a few points of studio news, and then we can kind of like jump into the root stuff. The major bit of news that I have for you all is the Ahoy backer copies will be shipping any day now. So
Yay.
we have them in hand. Everything is pretty much ready to go. We're just waiting for our spot in the shipping queue. So those should be going out very very soon. So if you were a backer of the new Ahoy expansions, know those are going to be on your doorstep pretty shortly. And I know that we have some things that we're planning in studio that we'll be doing to show them off. I feel like I've said this whenever the Ahoy stuff has come out. I can't wait for people to play these expansions. They are marvelous. They're really, I think, they do to Ahoy what Underworld did for Root, which is the Underworld gave people a chance to play Root without the cats. Once you swap the duchy in and made just a couple faction swaps, the game really opened up. And I think Ahoy opens up every bit as much as Root opened up. So I think people are going to be really
Yeah.
surprised and delighted by it.
Yeah, huge difference and beautiful too. I mean, when I got the copy, just like I'm always kind of astounded when I receive one of our games, but like especially the boxes. The
I,
boxes. It's
I think
just
it's because
all really, really fantastic.
you and I have to play them as prototypes mostly. Like most of the games of any that
Right.
we've worked on have been played in prototype format. I had this funny moment happen where I was pulling sleeves off of a copy of Oath because I was updating it to a newer printing or newer iteration, and I pulled off some of the pieces and was like, oh, I forgot how beautiful the cards and text are when they're of the appropriate size. Because oftentimes to
Yeah.
make I mean, it's a small thing, but to make a game print well, usually you slightly reduce it by just a couple percentage points. Mostly this happens automatically. If I set up a kind of a card sheet for cutting, when it goes fit to print, it's probably going to print at 97%. But that sometimes causes
Hmm.
weird picture artifacting and weird text
Right.
scaling. And it was just when I was pulling off it was Oath relics. I was like, oh gosh, these cards are so beautiful. I kind of forgot how nice this game looks.
Yeah, and you get the archaeology of all of the different versions as you go through the prototype, and then you finally hit the parent card, the thing that started it
Right.
all. So,
Well,
yeah,
and we have a rule for the oath cards where all of them are remaindered. Basically, like if we are using an oath kit because so many of the cards have got little updates on them, we have to use a Sharpie to like cross out the
right,
illustration to make sure that we know that like that is not a card that is in play right now.
right, yeah,
And then the other
yeah.
little point of studio news that I wanted to mention is that we will be closing our late pledges for Root on June 9th. So there will eventually be an update to this effect. But I just want everybody to know on stream that on June 9th we will be closing those late pledges, just so folks are aware of it. Cool. Excellent.
Yeah,
And that, go ahead.
and then yeah. Did you want to talk about like the reasoning for that call, or
I
do
mean,
you want
we
to?
can, I guess. Do you want to talk about the
Yeah.
reasoning for it? I'm happy to.
Sure. Yeah. No, I mean, this is something that we've been struggling over in the studio, basically, and so um, this uh, late pledge requirement is sort of coming from the tariffs, the incoming tariffs, and potential new tariffs, the unknown exact quantities and amounts of tariffs that are being levied or might be soon levied on products that we make.
Hmm.
We make the vast majority of stuff that we make, and all of our games are made in China, so we will be affected by these tariffs that are coming in. And that means basically that we have to make, especially for these products that we've already crowdfunded, basically. We need to make sure that we are doing due diligence for ourselves and for our backers by being very careful about
Hmm.
printing the proper amount, about shipping at the right time, basically about doing everything that we can to minimize risk for everybody involved. And so this is basically one part of that. Um, yeah, and critically, um, one thing that we can promise everybody is that we are not going to be charging you more for these, for the Root campaign, for the Oath campaign, these Kickstarters that are not yet fulfilled. So
Yeah.
just to make that absolutely clear, you will not be asked to pay more money. Um, that is clear. But yeah, the date is being pushed
Right.
so that we can make sure that all of our numbers are correct, and make sure that we're not doing any sort of unforced errors with our printing strategy.
Yeah. I mean, it's hard to know how this policy, in whatever form it eventually takes, will affect us. We know that for the short term, there are things that we can do to control the uncertainty. And then on the longer term, it will, of course, shape the way that we do business. But for the two outstanding projects, we're not going to ask for any more money. We think we've got a strong enough business plan that we'll be able to weather it. But we do need to start sort of like removing places of uncertainty. And one of those places is to cut off additional late pledges.
Yep.
What fun times.
Yep. Very fun
What a
times
distinct
for
pleasure.
board game makers everywhere and everybody else.
Yeah.
But definitely pretty much all board game makers, except for a very maybe some people produce in Germany, but it's
Mhm.
quite a minority. Um, Few people
Yeah,
produce in the US, but that's an extra minority. It's almost all China, basically.
and I will point people, if they're interested in knowing more about our position about the tariffs and how it affects how we do business. There's a long statement that can be found on our website, I think in the blog section. One thing I really like about this statement, which I want to underline to everyone, is that every game company is in a little bit of a different financial position, and they're all going to be reacting very differently to these policies. For some companies, these policies are catastrophic and would require very dramatic things. For us, we happen to be in a really fortunate position because of y'all's support and also because of decisions that were made at this company, in some cases a long time ago. And there's no right way to weather a storm. They're just, the only right way to weather a storm is to make sure you come out on the other side of it. And so, I hope that everyone's able to extend patience in whatever measure is required to all the different companies that they support.
Yep.
Okay, so with that, let's talk about some things that are a little bit more fun. So I'm going to say just a quick word, a little bit of a micro Oath update, and then we're going to spend the rest of the chat talking about the new Root stuff, which I've got laid out in front of me, but you can't see quite yet. So for Oath, last week, we published a giant kit that is, in a lot of respects, feature complete. So everything that new foundations can do, players can play right now. We have a fantastic model and tabletop simulator. There's a print and play kit if you want to hazard building it by hand. It all works, and it, I think, shows people the kind of full measure of the game. Now, it's not done. And in fact, one of the things that we're working on right now are a lot, but basically the things that we're working on right now fall into three categories in the world of Oath. The first category are balance adjustments, right? We need to make sure that every system in the game is working really well. So for example, in the kit that we posted, the edifices are like a little too sticky and like the board can fill up with like a little bit too many locked cards. That's fine. We are going to be fixing those sorts of things, those kinds of inflow, outflow questions. It's a matter of adjusting some small rules here and there, adjusting some card powers here and there. The second group of changes are editorial changes. So basically, now that the design is fully matured, we are going through and starting to lay out the rule books and the updated playbook and the law, and then doing editorial passes on all the components. We've started doing that. We have done an initial editorial pass through the rules, but we'll be turning that to the components next and then back again to the rules. That editorial pass, which includes a usability pass, is going to take about 2 months. It takes a long time, and we usually do it while we're doing final balancing. And then the final component is the final product design and art direction. Not art direction, the art is pretty well directed, but the actual completion of the illustrations for the game. Right now, Kyle is busy working on finishing all of the Root art. He'll be done in the next few weeks, and then we'll be moving over to Oath. And we've got an absolute mountain of art that he will be working his way through. So Oath's art, I will say, is about 40% done. So he's already done a pretty large chunk of it, and if you've gone through the new kit, you can see a lot of it. But we still have a ways to go. My guess is that the Oath project is going to be winding up sometime in the early summer. Previously, I've been kind of guessing around June. I think I still feel fairly comfortable with that, but sometimes those editorial tasks just take a little bit longer, especially as the Root project winds down. It may be that when Josh takes a look through all the Oath rules, you might suggest that we add some pages here or readjust the structure a bit. That costs time, and we're happy to spend it to get the project done well and right. But we are getting pretty close to the end here.
Yeah, this is an interesting time for the studio from an editorial angle because, basically up until a year ago, I was sort of the only staff member that really did any, that was like a rules person basically in terms of doing significant amounts of rules writing, editing, usability stuff on these projects. So um, partially it feels good to let some of that go, and partially I'm like, ah, I hope everything's going okay. So
I've been so thankful that I write the rule books for all my historical game projects, and I'm so glad that I still have those muscles. Because when I started writing, I'm like, okay, I can write a rule book. I know how to do this. Especially with Oath, we've been so grateful to have the style sheet established by the initial game. So we did an editorial pass on the denizens. We have about 60 new denizens in Oath. And I gave them to our junior developers on the project and said, basically, you need to make these stylistically match the existing denizens. So if you see a card effect that is similar to a card effect that's existed before, you need to make sure that grammatically, syntactically, it's following the same capitalization framework and things like that. We often don't have totally rigorous style sheets. We have a lot of semi-casual.
well, I have a rigorous one internally, so if
Well, I
you
know,
want it,
but
I can give it to
you
you.
should send it to me, Josh. No,
Yeah.
we just they aren't what I mean is they aren't housed in a place where anybody on
Central,
staff
yeah.
can easily access them. And I don't know if your style sheet, whatever you have internally, Josh, if how Oaths looks and how Arx's looks and how Roots looks, if they're all in the same
Right.
format or match, because we are
Yeah,
adjusting it from one project to another, right?
right. And this is a good example of how things need to change as a studio grows, because previously there wasn't really any reason for me to share these things, but definitely over the past year to year and a half as a studio, we've been doing a number of things to help centralize documentation that lots of people
Right.
can use. Making sure that all of our debriefs are in places where new people can read them, things like that. We're basically just we're no longer you know, just a few people in a room, essentially.
Yeah.
I mean, we
Well, no,
haven't been a few people in a room for a while, but I think that certainly, once we got to the point that we were doing two projects at the same
mhm.
time, it became very clear that that stuff was long overdue.
Yeah, we started doing proper project debriefs, sort of with Oath, but really with
Yeah,
Marauder was the first proper one. And before that, the debrief was we all went and got lunch and talked about the project. That was, and it
yep,
didn't get any more formal than that, which is fine for the staff that was present, but isn't so great when we bring someone on and we
yep,
gesture something that might have happened 3 years ago. But that's
yep.
just a company growing up. And then the other little thing I want to say about Oath is that Liz has made great progress on the solo mode for Oath. The solo mode for Oath is basically fully feature complete. There's lots of really cool stuff, and she's working on a couple kind of exciting surprises that she hopes to be able to show maybe in a month or two as we wind up the project. Solo modes are funny because they always work at a bit of an offset. So my design lock for New Foundations, which is to say, I don't want to be changing the law of New Foundations after the end of April. It's okay if content level changes happen, but I really don't want to be messing with any core rules. That deadline for the solo is about 6 weeks later. So in mid-May, or not mid-May, in mid-June, all of the solo stuff should be fully done. And that's because the solo components, even though everything gets printed at the same time, the nature of the solo components will mean that they're going to be getting completed and submitted to the factory a little bit after the rest of the main line. Okay, that's Oath news. That's all I've got for Oath
Exciting.
news.
Yeah, and it was really exciting the other day. Like I quite literally only played all this new stuff for the first time about a week ago, and it's great, Cole. It's like
I'm so glad you like it.
there are so many places where I just like laughed and I was like, why didn't we think of this back then? And that's always a good sign when you like look at something and it's immediately obvious how like you barely even need to play it. You just like look at it and you have this feeling of like, uh-huh, yep,
Yep.
that totally makes sense.
What I've been doing this morning is rewriting the Imperial Law, like the Imperial rules for how the citizens behave. And it's
Yeah,
amazing how much easier it is to write those rules after having worked on arcs.
yep,
Like
yeah,
just little innovations such as like this behaves this way, comma, during your turn, period. Which
sure.
like didn't I don't think really occurred to us as like a thing that we could do to stop some of the stranger interactions. But there's we'll do a whole chat about Imperial citizen interactions because
Yeah, no, I mean,
cleaning it up.
overlapping player positions is always just like an absolute nightmare to write rules for.
Right.
It's just like begin treating this thing as another thing is sort of core to
Mm-hmm.
all of that, or throw out your assumptions about like how you control something, like what control even means when you get to this like very metaphysical level of like how to treat pieces,
Mm-hmm.
yeah, it can get very, very hairy very quickly. But
Well,
it's another place where we've just learned so much as a studio over time.
yeah,
Oath was kind of like our first big foray into this, and
yeah.
then we learned more with hirelings, and then we learned more with arcs, and so we're just kind
It
of
is funny to think
propagating
about
all of that stuff.
like going backwards and thinking about Root as it could have been the weirdest game the studio had made, and then the studio went to into other games. But in fact, it
Hmm.
was the beginning of a much
Right.
stranger like turn. We had a game of Oath where two players basically conspired to bring down like an empire and then formed their kingdoms up and fully allied, swap sites. And at the end of the game, I was like, I don't know of any other strategy game that plays like this. Like it just like, and we have way leaned into like the strangest things that it does. Okay, but enough about Oath. Enough about my little baby. Let's talk about Root. Where do you want to start, Josh?
Yeah, so I'll just give kind of a quick elevator pitch and then we can just start jumping into pieces of it bit by bit. Um, so the first thing about Root Homeland is that development is really close to being done. If I had to put a number on it, I would say probably 2 or 3, maybe 4 weeks. It's getting pretty close. Um, that being said, uh, I'm happy to announce that today, in fact, when we finish the studio chat, we will be posting the next print and play. So this will include everything. This will include all the factions, all the maps, all the hirelings, everything. It is not 100% complete in development. It is not 100% complete in art, but it is a fair and good representation of like everything you will be receiving. It is the last print and play scheduled for now. After we release, maybe we'll go back and like tune up the last little things, but like don't expect another print and play during um, during development, this is the last one.
Mhm.
Um, so that's great news. I am especially happy for this because boy, was I stuck in the wilderness in like January and February, leading up to that previous print and play. And I'm happy to say that like over the course of the past months, things have cleaned up beautifully, especially the bats, which we will talk about in a little bit. But yeah, so when this is over, I will post a link to all the new content and a developer designer designer developer diary will go up soon after that, talking about all the stuff. So yeah, let's kind of jump into it. How about we just go straight to like the big stuff? Let's talk about the bats a little bit.
Let's talk about the
Let's pull
bats.
out these bats.
Here they are.
Um, so um, the basic the basic thing about the bats to know is that this faction was essentially two factions before. And the problem with that was that one faction was not that good. We essentially, as of the last print and play, we essentially had a faction that wanted to engage in kind of an auction with other players, and they wanted to use that auction to gain something. The conceit was still not sharp at this point. They wanted to they wanted to run these meetings, they wanted to gain some sort of political legitimacy, but none of that was really hitting their fundamental conceit, which was no, they're supposed to be slowing down the war. Like they're supposed to be slowing down the war, cooling it down, trying to broker peace, generally through peaceful means, but sometimes strong arming. And so, what has happened over the past couple months is that I essentially took the part of the faction that wasn't working out, and that left some gold, basically. So, the way that this faction works, um, essentially, what they're trying to do is they're trying to govern clearings. So, what does that mean? Governing basically just means that you get your assemblies out and then you rule them. So, this is kind of the critical thing. In the previous iteration of this faction, we had this warrior auction system on their board that people could participate in. It's like, oh, when you're with their assemblies, you can place warriors on the meetings, and that allows you to do things. The problem is that we already had a warrior auction system in this game. It's called Rule, and it's on the map. So, so when you notice something like that, Um, that basically allows you to do a lot of simplification, a lot of revision. So essentially, you get your assemblies on the map, you rule them, which flips them over to their like open side, their empowered side. And then for now on, until somebody says otherwise, you govern that clearing. So what does that mean? Basically, when you govern a clearing, you can score it. You can only score it if there are enemy buildings or tokens there. So, like, you are basically governing over the pieces of enemy factions. You have to sort of play this piggybacking game. The second thing is that governing severely limits and slows down other players. So, while a clearing is governed, enemies can't battle there. They can't, like, place pieces there. They can't remove pieces there. They can't flip pieces there. They basically can't do anything there. They can't craft there. They can't do anything there except moving in and out. And if they're defending in battle, they can defend. However, there's a couple ways to get around this. If an enemy rules that clearing, they show the sort of military strength that they need to get around governance. So this is kind of the auction system in effect here by another name. Once you've established governance, people can still override that either using rule or by spending a matching card. And this is kind of the card side of the whole bespoke auction Ark's court-like system that used to be in the game. So these same sorts of patterns are expressed here, like just as they were before, except they use the pre-existing frameworks of Root rather than trying to create something completely bespoke.
Mhm.
So essentially, the bats form this sort of variously symbiotic or parasitic relationship with the other factions. They want to be with the buildings and tokens of other factions in order to score them. And other factions kind of both do and don't. Because once the bats come in and they start squatting on your buildings and tokens, the thing about it is that the bats are actually going to start protecting your stuff. So
Mhm.
they have an ability called Peacekeepers, which basically says, hey, if somebody attacks you, somebody attacks your buildings and the bats are there, they're going to help protect you. So it kind of creates this like uh, highly entangled insurgent faction. So the faction is currently
Mhm.
rated at 4 reach. Highly entangled insurgent faction that really depends on other players.
Mhm.
And it totally flips the it flips the way you look at the map, both for the bats and for other players, because all of a sudden, um, there's like way less bare undefended cardboard on the board, for example. Like that's just one small but impactful thing that
Mhm.
happens when you have the bats on the map. um, you start looking at your hand differently because all of a sudden that workshop that you have over there you're not going to be able to use unless you pile your warriors in or you spend a card. So like now it puts a lot more hand pressure, which for card poor factions like the warlord, for example, like Lord of the
Mhm.
Hundreds, that's going to get pretty tight for you, so you need to think carefully.
Mhm.
So basically, the long and short of it is all of those same dynamics that I'd hoped for in the bats are there. Um, it's just a lot simpler now. It's like
Yeah.
half the words of
I
what it
mean,
was before.
this board is among the most word light boards in Root. I mean, it's not so far from the original Cats,
Yeah,
just in terms of the
yeah,
text
it's
on the board.
yeah. It is surprising how it went from kind of the wordiest, thorniest faction in the Homeland expansion to the least. So funny things can happen during development.
Well, and one of my favorite things
Yeah.
about it is how the entanglement, how it interacts even with other insurgent factions. Sometimes when you have multiple insurgent factions in a game of Root, they will kind of like pick different limbs of the giant to like attack.
Hmm.
But with the Twilight Council, like you can see a symbiotic relationship between them and the Woodland Alliance, where
Right.
the insurgent factions are kind of like growing together and forming a single constellation. It just gives so much political depth. I think especially the Homeland factions are going to be really wonderful, especially for folks who like playing Root as a 4, 5 player game or more. I mean those like really big games of Root with lots of really interesting faction interactions. The Twilight Council just like brightens all those colors.
Yeah. Yeah, the WA is a really great example because thinking about sympathy tokens, if you're governing a sympathy token, that means sort of two things. Like one, the WA can't use that to revolt. Like everybody at the table is sort of safer for the bats being there. But if the WA wants to burn some of their political capital and say, no, I'm going to spend a matching card to like turn off your governance for now, like they can do that. And because the WA is so card rich, they have a little bit more leverage there. But you are going to be slowing them down nonetheless. So it creates this interesting dynamic where that's no longer bare cardboard for the WA. They love it. That's cool. They're still going to be getting outrage and stuff like that. That's cool, but they're restricted in how they can use that sympathy. So yeah, it creates a lot of these interesting natural synergies and sort of stopping ups of the engine that makes you look at things a different way. So I'm seeing a question about like, is there any concern that having the bats around will slow down the game in general? The answer is no, basically. In our testing, games pretty much last the same length. There are enough ways for people to um, push around the bats in like very targeted ways that it is not like the engines do run a bit slower, but as far as like point scoring curves go, They are generally they're pretty close to how they've been. I haven't really been seeing games going like
Mhm.
super long, maybe like one extra round at most, but most of them are pretty much the same as they've always been in terms of game
Mhm.
length.
Yep.
Um, yeah, and part of that is just because like this is another like insurgent faction that like puts a lot of like it's an insurgent faction, but it puts a lot of cardboard on the board. But they don't have like really easy, readily accessible battle actions, and that sort of means that like the Twilight Council is broadly going to be scoring fewer points for cardboard. Right
Mhm.
now, they're looking like they're generally scoring like 1 point a game for cardboard, which just leaves more cardboard on the map for other players potentially. So
Yep.
yeah, in terms of like slowing the game down, we just aren't seeing that right now.
Mhm.
Um, yeah, so that's kind of the bats.
Cool. Yeah. So they're a
Let's
Reach 4
yep,
faction currently,
yep,
and not
yep.
not a red faction for people using advanced
Not a
tech.
red faction. Yep, yeah,
Cool.
yeah. The way that things are sitting right now is one of my like secondary or tertiary goals in doing Homeland was I was hoping that I would be able to get things so that you could play a game with just the Homeland factions and no hirelings. It's kind of on the edge at this point. I would say like you can. It might be a little bit of a weird game, but like
Sure.
I think it's possible. So we're kind of like working out those like last little things. But yeah, it's currently looking like about a reach for. Um,
Yeah, I mean,
yeah,
I remember playing like Vagabond WA Erie games, which like kind of work, but they're so strange that
yeah,
it's hard to put it on the recommended, the recommended tag.
yeah. I would say it's strange but doable. Like
Yeah,
the frogs and the naves, they put out enough cardboard and have enough ways of like really hooking into the faction that it's generally fine, but it's not like the absolute ideal experience. So
sure. Cool. Well,
um
let's
yep.
should we talk about the names then?
Yeah, let's move on to the naves. So it's skunk time. The naves. Um, Knaves have also gone through a number of changes, certainly less extreme than the bats. And a lot of this is going to be pretty familiar, but a lot of it's not. The first thing that I'll say that many people should be happy for is that we're back to three captains. Hooray, we got there. But the critical thing here and the thing that had to happen with this faction is that on each turn, you're still only activating one of your captains. This is kind of the critical thing. The reason that in the previous print and play, the number of captains went down to one was because having three that all could activate on your turn meant that the knaves were essentially everywhere every turn. This was
Hmm.
not fun to play against at all. And it just made them feel kind of boring and uninteresting. Like they could just always pop out of the forest in the places that they need to. They ran
Hmm.
their little faction game, and then sometimes they would pop back. And yeah, it just wasn't interesting from like a tactical puzzle perspective. It was frustrating for other players. There were just a lot of things about it that just didn't work. So um, in the knaves now. The way that it works is that every turn you're going to be activating one of your captains. And that is the only captain that you can like take actions with that turn. However, you are selecting which captain that is in the evening of your previous turn. So you're going to have your three captain options, and you're going to be choosing one secret. So, like at the end of your turn, you're going to be selecting one of your cards and putting it face down, and then at the top of your turn, you're going to be flipping that over and going, "Oh, it was the jailer all along that I was activating." So there are some interesting mind games that can come here in terms of like the way that you look at the knave's board position, because even though they can be like sort of everywhere, the knaves have to make a decision about where they actually want to like interact with on that next turn. And so other players have to try to prepare for like the most likely outcomes. um based on like where they are relative to certain captains. So you reveal your captain. Cool, great. And then you get to do stuff. The critical other change in this faction is that the bag, the item bag, is gone. Sorry, item bag's gone. Um, there's good reason for this. And I can guarantee you 100% that the item bag is not coming back. The reason that the item bag is gone is because bag building in a root faction is not fun. Why is that? When you make a bag building game, the thing that fundamentally lets you tell stories at the table is when stuff comes out of the bag. When you play Quacks, for example, everyone at the table is going like, I hope they bust, I hope they bust, I hope they bust. And it creates this very focused story. Everyone's like looking for the specific thing where they bust. That sort of dynamic just does not come out in any way that we built bag building for this faction previously. The reason for that is because the more you allow for bag building, the more sort of diluted all of the captain's identities become. They kind of all start to like blend together in a way that feels very unsatisfying. And so instead, what we've replaced this with is a much leaner and tighter action system that emphasizes the personality of these captains. So the way that it works is at the start of the game, you essentially get three captains. Um, and you take the six items that are shown on those captains, and that forms kind of your starting pool of items. Um, so that kind of goes in your stash, which is on your player board, and your stash is like your collection of items that you can pull from throughout the course of the game. Now, the critical thing is that when you reveal your captain, so like we've revealed the jailer here, the only items that you get to refresh are the ones shown on the captain. So like you have all of these items, you have these six items, but if you've used some of those items on previous turns, you don't get to refresh them unless your captain says so. So like the jailer here gets to refresh their swords and their boots, but they won't refresh their other items. So there's kind of two things that this does. The first thing is that it means your choice of captain is very important, both at setup and your choice turn over turn. And it also means that there is a lot more clarity in terms um, of people looking at your current setup and going, okay, well, the only way they can refresh certain items is by choosing a specific captain. The bag hid everything from everybody, basically, which, in addition to sort of diluting the story, meant that people just couldn't plan. Like, they just literally, they would have to keep track of literally everything. Um, and so, especially for enemies, this was just not. Um, it was either not possible or if they tracked everything, not fun.
Yep.
And so what this allows is a much clearer link between captain and item, both from the
Mm-hmm.
perspective of your overall composition and your turn over turn tactical decisions. So
Okay.
it just works a lot better. Like there's pretty
Yeah.
much no downside as far as I can tell.
No,
So
Josh, what you said dovetails like with a piece of advice I often give to new designers, which is if you open up a pitch with me and you say like, "Oh, my game, this is a game is a deck builder," like
yeah,
it's always like a yellow flag because deck builders, like if you start with a design saying I'm going to tell X story through deck building, it's
yeah,
like the wrong relationship. Like you should have been backed into a corner, but like your game should have to be a deck builder or it's nothing. You know what I mean? And
yeah,
I feel like a lot of
yeah.
times bag building has the same thing where the we don't feel the costs to a deck builder or a bag builder because if you play a lot of hobby games, you are completely in the sauce. You know those systems very fluently. And so what you don't see is how, boy, if you're not going through that deck a dozen times, you're not really having a chance to get any kind of deck identity. You're hiding a ton of information from players, from each other. there are all these design liabilities that really just stack up and stack up. So it is not surprising, and is a really welcome change to be moving away from deck building or bag building in this case to something a lot more transparent.
Yeah, and sort of like the fundamental question or fundamental dynamic that that bag was trying to solve for was how do you create interesting turn over turn action puzzles? Because I knew that I didn't want the knaves to have access to their full item pool each turn, like the vagabond does. But yeah, sort of realizing like, oh yeah, this is just so limiting the ability of the table to engage in the story. And like fundamentally, we're in there like we make strategy games here, like quite often, and like Root is definitely a strategy game, but it's a narrative strategy game. Like you have to be able to tell this good story. So if people aren't
Right.
keyed in, story just does not form. So those are kind of like the main, like those are the main points about how the naves have changed over time. There's a lot of other stuff, a lot of other like little tweaks that I could go into. I generally won't right now. The only other thing that I will say about it is another really nice storytelling device that the knaves engage in now is that hostages are now no longer stored on the knaves board. They're actually stored in the forests themselves. And this does a really cool thing, which it engages with the geometry of the map in a way that makes sense. You're always pulling things off the board into adjacent clearings. You're having to build up your dens, the buildings that you have. You're having to build up dens around those forests in order to keep the hostages from escaping. So it engages with the geometry of the board in a very natural way that feels a lot better than it did before.
Mm-hmm.
So that's the only other thing that I'll say about the naves. Yeah, there's a lot of other little tweaks, but check all that stuff out in the print and play. So
So then, what Josh, where are the knaves sitting in terms of their reach and their draft characteristics?
yeah, they're about a six. They're either a five or a six right now. They're definitely so I would call them like a low piece count militant faction.
Cool.
So they're still technically an insurgent. They're being coded as insurgent in advanced setup, and they're hovering around like a six reach. So
Hmm.
yeah, it's really they have the ability to really punch and really police, but their
Hmm.
piece count is pretty low. So that's sort of the main thing.
Hmm. And I saw there was a discussion in the thread earlier. So these cards here, which look like vagabond cards, are not vagabond cards. They're captain
Yes.
cards, but we have them for all of the existing vagabonds.
Yep. And so basically, these all have their own unique abilities now. They're all fully keyed into the Knaves' systems. Just over time, uh, as I continued working on them, especially with this new item system, I wanted to really use these captains to engage with the item system. So, like a lot of these captains can use items in different ways. A lot of captains have like little item writers, and so it kind of like depending upon your captain composition and your captain choices turn over turn, you can kind of bend your items toward different uses. So that's like the main design like thrust of these captains is using items in different ways. So
Yep. And then, for completion's sake, the three new captains, including the jailer here, also have vagabond cards.
yep. Yeah, so as promised, in this PNP, we'll be releasing vagabond versions of these guys. So check those out as well.
Oh, nice. Do you want to talk about their interaction with the vagabond faction? A couple of people have asked about
Absolutely.
that in comments.
Yeah. Yeah, and so basically, as we talked about during the Kickstarter itself, the knaves. the Knaves and the Vagabond are exclusive. You cannot play them in the same game. And there are really a few reasons for this. The first sort of straightforward one is that the Knaves use the Vagabond pawns. The reason for this is because making a faction that wants to have tons and tons and tons of unique little pawns means that uh, it's really easy, less costly for everybody if we use vagabond pawns. Thematically, it makes sense. These guys are basically brigands. These are sort of vagabonds that have banded together into a gang, as it were. But more importantly and more fundamentally, the Knaves are a faction that take hostages. They take warriors off of the board as hostages as their central scoring mechanism, and so that is just straight incompatible with the vagabond. You wouldn't be able to take any hostages, and so their scoring system just wouldn't work at all. Um, so basically in drafts, you can choose to include either the vagabonds or the knaves, and that's just currently that's just a choice that you make before, like as you are forming your draft pool. You decide as a table whether you're including one or the other. You can also, if you want to, you can also just include one card of each and nix the second one that comes out. But the official rule is just that as a table, you'll decide which one you want to play with.
Cool. All right, and then with that, we can look at the last component of the expansion, which I'm going to bring over here. The map.
Yeah, the maps. So we'll just kind of be running through the marsh map a little bit on this stream. The gorge map is also included in the print and play, but there's not really that much to talk about it. It doesn't really have any like special rules to it, so we'll talk a little bit about the marsh map. And obviously this is not final art. Kyle is working on all the maps right now. Um, so the marsh map. The marsh map is a map that can support five or more players very comfortably. So you'll notice that it actually has 15 clearings rather than 12. And the way that this works is during setup, you are going to be flooding some of these clearings. So right now, you'll see that actually all of the clearings on the map that can be flooded are flooded right now. So there are these covers that you'll put on the map. And so if you are playing with five or more players, none of the clearings will be flooded. But if you're playing with 1 to 4 players, you will flood three of these clearings. So basically, there are like three sets of clearings that can get flooded. You will cover up one of each of these sets, so like one light green, one dark green, and one brown with the flood marker. And that will sort of define your map for the game. So like this isn't something where like over the course of the game, like some like clearings get flooded. Um, thanks, Matt, for the assist here. Um,
I haven't
like
played
this
on this
isn't
map yet.
yeah, yeah. um, this is not something where over the course of the game, like clearings will get flooded and clear out. This is just a setup change. So you are defining what the map looks like during for the whole course of the game. Um, One important thing to note about flooded clearings is that some of these clearings have paths that are flooded out. So you'll see on the cover that's to the right, the brown one, you'll see that the path kind of scoots into the cover, but it doesn't actually link up with the path that's going north south. Um, Basically, these flooded paths you cannot travel using these paths, so they still like demarcate the forest that they surround. So like, we want to show where the forests are still, obviously, but you can't travel between those clearings. So those clearings are always cut off from each other. Um, when you are playing with five or more players, so as I mentioned, that means that you'll have 15 clearings. This means that you need some way to add suits to those three extra clearings. And the way that we do that is we have these three new landmarks. We have these suited landmarks um, called Foxborough, Mousehold, and Rabbit Town. And essentially, one of those landmarks is going to go in each of those three empty spaces. This is something that we talked about in the Kickstarter, but a lot of development has gone into them over time, and their effects are pretty different from what we showed in the Kickstarter. Um, the long and short of it is that Foxborough links together all the fox clearings. Rabbit Town lets you spend rabbit cards to sort of place warriors there and then battle. It's sort of like a Rabbit Thunderdome sort of affair. And then Mousehold is essentially a different take on field hospitals. So whenever warriors get removed in other mouse clearings, you can spend a mouse card to place them back in Mousehold. So it becomes this like mouse-only field hospitals for everybody. So all of
It's a
these
little
landmarks
Abby.
are essentially, yeah, exactly. Like all of these landmarks are basically like they're sort of binding together this larger map. A really important thing that we learned on, I'd say Ahoy actually, is that when you have these like larger spaces that you're moving around, you want these like pieces of connective tissue to sort of like create these other strange interconnections. And so all of these landmarks do that. For the Marsh map. So even though you are playing with a lot of players and you're playing on a big map, like playing on 15 clearings feels big compared to 12. These landmarks
Mhm.
are also creating these new sort of like other axes of interconnection on the
Yeah.
map.
Cool. Yeah, I'm really
Um,
excited to play on this map. I just have not been. I haven't had a playtest day when people have been doing the big games yet.
yeah. Yeah, I see a question about the landmarks about is it only for the ruler or for anybody? Um, these effects anybody can use. So like moving through Foxborough to and from other fox clearings, anybody can do. The Mousehold effect anybody can do. Rabbit Town anybody can do. It's all just stuff anybody can do. It's all a lot of it is costly in some way. Like two of those effects require cards. But yeah, it's anybody can use these.
Great. And then, do you want to say anything about the gorge map? Just we don't have it on camera.
Yes, and actually, I somebody is saying something very important. This is a developer brain happening here. Um, I kept saying that for Mousehold you spent a card. That's wrong. That was the previous version of Mousehold. You no longer have to spend a card. It just happens. Um, as we're working on these games, we go through like a billion different versions, and so my brain just skipped back a version. Yes, if warriors get removed from a mouse cleric, they just go into Mousehold. It doesn't actually require a card spend. But yeah, let's talk a little bit about the gorge map. Um, the gorge map is a basically what I would call it is it's an alternate autumn map. It doesn't have any
Mhm.
special rules to it, but it has a very interesting geometry. So it's shaped like a gorge. It basically has a path that's kind of cut through the middle,
Mhm.
and bridges going over the gorge, sort of horizontally over the gorge. And so it's just like a new take on autumn geometry. One thing that like prize in root maps is like their lightweightness. Like I don't really
Mhm.
like maps that have too many special rules. And this is kind of like the epitome of that, where it's just like it's just a different geometry that is really going to make the map feel different. It doesn't really
Right.
need any special rules.
Yeah, it's
Um,
kind of like the winter map, like folded in on itself in a weird way. Like
mhm.
there are more connections than that, but it is a really interesting take on the kind of base route maps.
Yep. Yeah. So that is also going out in the print and play. Even though the art looks like it might be done, it is not. It is still the original art that Sam put together. Kyle
Hmm.
is also still drawing that. So even though it looks somewhat done, it is not.
Yeah,
So just know that.
yeah. I'm excited to start showing more photos of the other stuff. And then the very last thing I wanted to mention about the Root project is the one faction we didn't talk about are the frogs, who have just kind of
Yep.
been done for a while.
Yeah, they've just been done. Yeah, essentially, like, since the last print and play, just like a few little cleanups. Just like changed a few cards, cleaned up the provoke action a little bit, but that's really it. They've basically been done, and they continue to be
Yeah.
done. So
They're just doing the work, and then to round things out, like the frogs are a red faction for the draft, and then what's the reach, like 7 or 8? I can't remember what it.
7 right now. Yeah.
Yeah, cool.
Yep.
Sweet. All right. Well, thank you for that, Josh. I'm so excited that everyone's getting this massive kit. And the best part of Root print and play kits, something that Josh and I talked about back in our GDC talk, they're so easy to build. So, like, if you've got a copy of Root in a printer or access to a printer, it will not take you that long to, explore any of these new factions.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I'm really excited to see what people have to say. Really excited that like things are kind of coming to a close and turning out really well.
Mhm.
Yeah, no, it's been a wonderful time making this stuff.
Yeah, really looking forward to playing it more. And some people have asked about the deck. The deck is also like pretty much done. There's like
Yes.
some
Yeah,
very little.
yep, yeah. I would say the deck is 100% done at this point. There might be like,
Mhm.
oh, a crafting cost might change slightly or something like that, but like I would say that it's done at this point.
Yeah, pretty good. Well, Josh, you won the race. You finished your project before I finished Oath. Happy
Well,
to
mine
happy to
mine was smaller anyway.
I'm gonna give you a big thing of milk. So with that, I think we will call it a day. Just so folks, kind of going back to some earlier points. One, if you're an Ahoy backer, you'll be getting your copies soon. I'm so excited for people to get playing the new Ahoy expansion and seeing it in action. If all this Root stuff is pretty exciting and you missed the crowdfunding campaign and want to hop on, know that you have until June 9th to hop on the Root late pledge. It will still be open till then. And that's it for us. In our next update, we'll probably be showcasing Ahoy and probably talking a little bit more about Oath. That'll be in our May studio chat, second week of May. Cool. Anything else, Josh?
Just that I will be posting the link to the print and play here in just like 10 seconds. So keep an eye out
All
for
right.
that. And designer diary and everything like that will be up in the next half an hour or so. So keep an eye out for that.
Awesome. And then a couple of folks have asked about the internship. We're doing interviews mostly this week. We'll probably make our selection next week. You do not need to email me about it. I will email you. All right. Thanks, everybody. Have a wonderful day. Happy April.
See you later.